Hello everyone, I'm Marianne Ferretta, one of the product managers on the ArcGIS Online team, and I'm here today with two longtime product engineers and wonderful colleagues, Jeremy Bartley and Paul Barker. Together, we will walk you through some tips and tricks for viral maps in ArcGIS Online. ArcGIS Online apps help users share, explore, and manage their organization's data using many different types of workflows. A small team may edit data, which is then shared with the entire globe. We've all seen this with regional agencies publishing COVID-19 dashboards. We also have large interagency teams with data editors distributed across multiple geographic regions. Editors who each need to see and interact with different areas of the same data, and whose work is served downstream to a handful of stakeholders and sometimes millions of stakeholders. In this presentation, we'll show you how to optimize each of these workflows by tuning your hosted feature layers with cache control, hosted feature layer views, and other ArcGIS Online tools. We'll get this started by learning how to recognize the potential for high volume or viral workflows, and then view some demos and details from Jeremy and Paul. To get an idea of your app's potential for high volume or viral traffic, consider two concepts, audience and workflows. The first audience element to consider is scope. Is your app directed toward a small team or a larger audience, such as a regional wildfire app or a global scope, such as COVID-19 dashboards? The second audience element to consider is, how will the users discover the app? Will it be shared on a small scale and circulate in a limited scope? Or is it likely to catch the attention of social media or news networks and larger regional stakeholders? Determining scope and promotion give you an idea of potential volume, which we measure in queries per second. An information product designed for global consumption and promoted by the media can attract up to 175,000 queries per second, but a private team-focused app will have far fewer. With the audience characteristics of scope, promotion, and volume in mind, we'll turn our attention to workflows. Information discovery workflows are geared toward read-only discovery with a live internet connection. Think of an app showing the locations of local polling stations or reporting the current COVID-19 infection rates in a specific area. Some workflows, particularly mobile workflows, include syncing and editing. Later in the presentation, we'll see why sync and edit workflows have a different scalability profile than information discovery workflows. Lastly, identify workflows involving extent filters or relative time. This includes lists or charts filtered by the map's extent, or a subset of features which changes dynamically relative to the current time. These also scale differently from information discovery workflows. We'll look at these in more detail later in the presentation. Once you've identified you're preparing a potentially viral app, map, or layer, you'll want to know how to choose configurations which optimize scalability. Information discovery workflows achieve the highest scalability by issuing repeatable queries and rendering feature tiles served from a cache near you. Let's hand it over to Jeremy to get some more details. Jeremy?
All right, thanks, Marianne. Let's talk a little bit about how feature layers work. So, Esri apps have been designed to query data for display in a way that can be shared across different maps by different users. Let's take a look at this example here. I've got a building footprints layer, and you can see these building footprints, like really small polygons here. It looks in the same area. I actually have it in two different maps. In both maps, the same query is issued for this red bounding box around Dodger Stadium. Why is that important? That's important because anytime we can repeat the same query across different users in different browsers, they become shared queries, and they can be cached at different tiers in the system, from your browser cache to the CDN, which is the Content Delivery Network, to an internal cache of feature tiles within ArcGIS Online. The results from that first map can be used in the second map, saving the resources on the data store. As the data changes, those caches are invalidated and new data comes in. Let's take a look at a demo of this in action. Okay, so I've got this layer here. This is actually census tracks. And I've disabled the browser cache. I've got my network debugging tools open here. I just want to give you an idea for what's going on under the hood. So I'm filtering on just things that call query in the URL. Okay, there we go. I see that for this view, it required 6 queries. It took about 542 kilobytes. Let's take a look at these queries. A couple things just to want to call out. So this is a bounding box, an envelope geometry. So it's similar to that red tile that I just showed you. We're also quantizing this. What does that mean? That means we're reducing the resolution of the feature. So basically we want no more than 1 vertex per pixel. And at this screen size, a pixel represents 1200 meters. And we're telling the server that, hey, this can be cached because it's a tile query. It's worth caching. Now let's look at the response headers. This layer is not public, it's private. So the cache control is set to private. Nothing is going through the CDN. But I do see some information here. I see the Esri F tiles. This means that it's coming from a cache served within ArcGIS Online. Now let's make a few changes to this layer to show you what happens when data changes. So let me hop over here, and I'm going to make just a slight change. Notice that this data hasn't been changed since June 3rd. Make this, change it back so I don't screw up this data. So it's just updated right now. So when I'm recording this, and let's go back to the map here and reload. Okay, I'll turn the visibility on for this layer. And it's going to notice it's going to take a little bit longer. These queries, you see they're pending. Those times are now in the multiples of seconds. Let's look at one of these. So in the response header, there's nothing from the CDN, and I don't see that feature tile header anymore. That's because it's not coming from the feature tile. It's actually coming from the database. Now let's let me just clear this, zoom in once, and I don't really care about those, but I want to zoom back out again. Now it drew much faster. Now it wasn't coming from the browser cache because I disabled that, but we see I've got this F tiles, Esri X-Esri-F tiles, which indicates it's coming from the feature tile cache within ArcGIS Online. And the times are way faster, 260 milliseconds. Now what happens when I make this public? So I'm going to go back to the item page, and I'm going to share this to everyone. Okay. And I want to call your attention into the settings of the item page. If you scroll down to the bottom here, you'll see this section on cache control. And this allows us to improve the performance of your layers worldwide. The CDN is a content delivery network, It can dramatically decrease the latency when delivering your public content around the globe. We don't cache private content at the CDN. But once it's public, we can now leverage the CDN to further improve the performance. And the default we set is 30 seconds, but you can change this upwards of an hour if you want. Basically, if your data doesn't change, set this to an hour. That's going to give you the best possible performance and scalability. You don't want to set this to never, because that's going to force everything past the CDN to ArcGIS Online. If it's going public, there's no business in setting that less than 30 seconds, but we do have that option there. Now let's go back, and I'm gonna I'll just reload here. Get this thing loaded. Okay, let's turn that layer on. It's going to be slow because actually changing that sharing state, sorry, it's not going to be slow. It's going to be relatively fast. We're seeing about 400 milliseconds. I'm not hitting CloudFront, so no CDN yet. But I am still hitting that feature tile cache. Let's just zoom in once, clear it out, and then zoom back out. Well, that's quite a bit faster. Look at those times. Now we're in 54 milliseconds. We've dropped another order of magnitude. And it's coming from CloudFront. So when you've shared that layer publicly, you can really increase the performance of your application by leveraging the CDN. And this is something that we just do automatically for you. What it also means, though, is that if you make any changes to the data, it's going to stay at that CDN for however long that is. Now, if we look at this and look at the response headers, we'll see that the max age is 30 seconds. This means that any changes between when it first happened to 30 seconds won't go back to ArcGIS Online. We'll just serve that from the cache. So if you're making changes, if you make a change and you want to immediately see it, you're not going to see it. But after 30 seconds, it'll go back to ArcGIS Online, validate, and then get the freshest data. So you have other options too besides feature layers. You also have tile layers, both vector and raster tiles. Well, just spending a little bit of time here to try to explain the differences between these from a performance and viral perspective. Raster tiles are pre-built and offer fast display, but require management to update tiles as data changes. And you don't have access to features on the client. Vector tiles are also pre-built and offer fast dynamic display. By that I mean, labels move as you rotate the map. It feels more dynamic. It looks crisper on high-resolution devices. But it also requires management to keep those tiles up to date. As you make changes to the data, you need to go and if you make changes to the data, you need to rebuild those tiles, both raster and vector tiles. And vector tiles require an even further step where you need to think about what attributes does your client need for those vector tiles. By default, we include the attributes that are used in the renderer that you create. But if your application needs something that's not in the renderer, you'd have to add that. But you need to be careful because the more attributes you add, the bigger that tile gets. Feature tiles provide access to the features. They're built on the fly, and they stay up to date without intervention. This is like getting the performance of vector tiles with the crisp look and the dynamic, rotating labels and so on, but without having to actually build a layer to manage. It follows the same pattern that I just showed you. As data is changing, those tiles are automatically invalidated and will get recreated as people view them. A couple things to note with feature layers. You need to be careful. If you're updating your data every 15 seconds, well, that's probably actually too fast to have a public map. So that's going to cause a higher use on your data store. A good rule of thumb is to only update public layers at a frequency that matches your CDN caching. If you update the data every 15 minutes, set your CDN cache setting to 10 to 15 minutes. All right, now I'm going to hand it over to Paul Barker, who's going to talk about views. Paul?
All right, thanks for that overview on how caching works, Jeremy. Let's switch gears and talk about hosted feature layer views really quick. So some of you might be familiar with views, but they do play an important role in making sure that your maps and apps are viral ready. So for those who are unfamiliar, from a hosted feature layer, you can create a view or many views, and each view points back to the original data in we'll call it the parent feature layer. That allows you to create different perspectives into your data set. So you might want to share a read-only layer to the public and an editable layer internally, or maybe even collaborate with an organization by sharing a different view of the data. And what we mean by view of the data is that when you create a view, you can set a definition on it, and that definition has kind of three core components. The first is that you can hide or show certain fields in that view. You can define a filter on the view, so maybe you only want to see records where it has gone through an internal review and its status is ready for the public. And you can also restrict the information geographically, so you can manage a larger data set, and when you need to, you can create these little windows into that data set for focused use cases. Maybe there's an event, maybe there's a project within your municipality or county. You can define an area geographically and just share it out through that. And then the end users only have access to that information. It's important to call out that this is slightly different than some of the filters and hiding fields in the pop-up, like you can do in the web map. This definition is kind of burned into the view. And so even if you allow your users to export the data from the view, or they add the layer to a new map, this is enforced. So this is actually a pretty strict definition. So you can the end user can't remove it, which is really nice when you want to hide things like sensitive information. And so that's the definition of the view, but you can also kind of go one step further, and because it's its own feature layer view, you can actually change and control access to editing. So you could have a read-only view to the public. You could create a second view and make it editable for people inside your organization that are doing data collection or even data review. So by having that access, you can really tweak things and tune things for the end user. And an important feature too is that these have independent sharing to one another. So feature layer view 1 could be private, feature layer 2 view 2 could be public. So you have a lot of control over this. So you can create these unique windows into your data set, all the while you have that parent layer and that you use from a management perspective. You wouldn't even need to share it to anyone but yourself or the other folks that data custodians within your organization. So with that kind of overview, let's just hop through and take a quick look at how you do this today, and maybe talk a little bit towards the end about how that experience is changing and what's next really quickly. So I'm going to just pop into my content really quick, and this is the layer we're going to work with. I'm a big fan of urban forestry. Most of you probably know that from blogs and demos. But this is a layer, just ignore the deprecated there. I've added that so that it's suppressed in the search results so that my demo data sets don't get confused with good users' data sets. So from a hosted feature layer view that you own, you can come here and just say create view layer. And so what that's going to do is create a new view. Let's say that this one's going to be public viewing. So what's going to happen right now is it's going to go out, it's going to create that view. You'll have a new item in your My Content. You can change the sharing. So let's just take a few minutes All right. So now that we've got the view, it has, it's a direct clone of the parent feature layer at this point. So we want to tailor that for the use case that we've defined. So in this case, it's public and viewing. So we're going to go over to the visualization tab really quick. And you can see I've got a lot of points, and they're very poorly themed. But so the first area here is define features. So we could actually set a view definition based on, a traditional filter. I'm not going to do that because I want the public to see all of the trees. But what I do want to do is go to define fields, and I want to get rid of some of the noise. Like there's a number of fields in here that just don't make sense. So I'm going to remove XYZ, GeoID, and structural ID because they're largely internal. I'm going to hit apply. That's actually going to update the definition at that point. And now, if we were to go back and look at the data tab, you'll see that I actually don't see those fields anymore, and they don't show up even as an option. So from there, I could share that to the public, and away I go. So you can always, from a view, hop back to the source layer. So you can say it's created from the urban forestry layer. So I'm going to go back to the view. And I'm going to create another view layer really quick, just to highlight a slightly different use case. Public event downtown. Just take a few seconds. So now we've got a second view layer. Still read only by default. I'm going to zoom into, let's just say, let's try and squeeze Toronto Island in the window. I apologize for the smaller screen. We're doing that to make your recording streaming a little bit easier. So I'm going to do the same thing I did last time. I'm going to go to define fields. I'm going to turn off the fields that the public doesn't care about. Apply. I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to go to step 2. Let's imagine that this is called Toronto Island, this area. Let's imagine that we're doing an event on Toronto Island. And I'm just going to quickly restrict. Oops, I clicked outside my window. Let's come back here. There's no trees over here, but you know what? Maybe there will be by the time that this event takes place. Go through here and double click to finish. So I've roughly defined a polygon. I could apply at this point, and boom, that data set is now kind of restricted to within the bounds of that polygon that I've defined. So you can see that we've created a really focused data set all of a sudden geographically. And this can be really handy for, like I said, events or different activities where, maybe you just want the trees as a backdrop in your map that you're producing, but you don't want to show the whole set of trees. So you can actually quickly filter this, and away you go. And last but not least, I'm going to hop over to the settings page and just talk a little bit about this. So you can see that editing is not enabled. You can see that Jeremy talked a little bit about the cache control earlier. So here you can tune that cache control. So, I might, I've got it set to 5 minutes, which is different from the default. By default, it's 30 seconds. And you can see right here that it's actually inheriting from the source. So by default, when you create a view layer and the parent has a cache control set, it inherits from the parent. And that's true of most properties of the view. So I can tweak that and tune that as needed. And you can also see that on the data tab if we go over to the fields. So actually, you know what? Let's just pretend really quick that this is an editable view. So I'm going to hit save. So let's imagine this is, rather than walking through creating another third view and taking extra presentation time, let's just pretend we've created the view, and we're going to create a data collection view for that other island on the Toronto Island that hasn't hasn't got any trees yet. So like I said, by default, things inherit. And we can actually go to something like here, and you can actually see that the properties are being inherited. So we've got a little feedback here, and you can change some of these properties on the view and override them. And if you do, then as the view or the parent updates, you won't get updates. So say like you had a domain with tree species. If you overrode the domain at the view level, then you wouldn't get updates as the parent one updates. So just keep that in mind. But one of the nice things about this is that we can very easily disable fields too. So in this particular case, maybe this field is an internal one that gets populated after the field activity, and you don't want your users actually editing in the field. So you can actually go over here and override the editability of that field. And so for the people using that view, that field is actually read-only. The parent still editable, just like it always would be with your, you as the owner. However, you can tweak that view. And so another thing is, so maybe you did that accidentally and you just want it to kind of get back in sync with the parent. You can actually just click reset to source. I didn't click properly. And then that'll reset back to the parent. And so you can kind of quickly override the view and then get back to kind of an in-sync status. So really flexible. This is actually a feature that the Living Atlas makes use of quite heavily for some of the OpenStreetMap layers to kind of make sure that the right fields get populated in the community editing project and restricting fields that don't make sense for the community to edit. And so that's a brief overview on creating views, and let's just talk about why they're important, I guess, from a viral perspective. So if we go back, this is the key thing. You may need to keep your parent layer editable for business reasons and to update. By being able to create those read-only views, share them to the public, restrict the information, and then adjust the cache control, you can really make sure that they meet the demand when they become viral and popular. So just keep that in mind. And that cache setting can actually be higher than the default. It's by default 30 seconds. But if you're not editing the data and it's not updating and it's not critical that the public see the latest updates even as they come in, you can kind of raise that or expand that time so that it to an even longer window. So even 5-10 minutes if your data isn't being updated. So really quick, I just want to talk to you about what's next and what we're working on for creating view layers. So in hopefully in the next update or two, you're going to see a completely new experience for creating view layers, and as well as updating them. So when you create a new view layer, and you can actually choose individual layers to add or remove from the view when you create it, and while you're authoring it, you'll be able to set that view definition before you actually create that initial copy of the view. And last but not least, a really big push we're trying to do is get some really nice visual feedback when authoring, so that as you apply the different definitions, you can kind of see that ahead of time before you kind of hit done. So, and then we'll continue to expand that experience out in future updates to support joins and some of the other options that kind of are sitting there under the hood, but we've yet to bring them to life through the user experience in ArcGIS Online. And that's all I've got. I'm going to hand it back over to Marianne to take us to the finish line on this presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. We've covered a lot of ground here. Jeremy showed us how feature tiles support repeatable queries and caching, which are the bedrock supporting the largest viral traffic loads. And Paul showed us how to create multiple views of our data to meet the needs of each stakeholder, from editors to members of the public and GIS experts and more. Most ArcGIS Online apps are well suited to viral load, but there are a few specific workflows you need to watch out for. In this context, let's revisit two of the workflows I mentioned earlier in the presentation, extent filters and relative time. First, let's look at this example of filtering by map extent. In this example, watch the list on the left-hand side. Each time the user zooms in, the map extent, shown here with a green box, changes and the list adjusts in response. This list is filtering by map extent, dynamically returning only those features which are in the map extent each time the map is moved. Because the size of the map extent window will vary by each user's browser, device, and area of interest, the queries generated by this workflow are unique to each user, not repeatable in the manner Jeremy described earlier. And that's okay for some workflows, such as your small group of editors working on private layers. But for public viewing and high loads, we really want to harness the scalability of feature tiles. We may see this change in the future. We're always improving ArcGIS Online technology and tools, so stay tuned. But for today, we'll find alternatives to filtering by map extent for any of your viral apps. One alternative is this group filter widget. In this case, rather than filtering the list based on the map extent, the user will select an area of interest as the filter, and the map will zoom accordingly. In this case, the group filter uses county polygons, so the user selects a county and a single click reorients the map and refreshes the list accordingly. Because the extent, in this case the county polygon, is the same for all users, the response is repeatable and can be shared from the cache to all subsequent users. And the second workflow to look out for when building viral apps is relative time. The current timestamp changes moment to moment, and therefore isn't repeatable and won't be cached. In this case, filtering on creation date being in the last 3 minutes is really a current timestamp query. It queries the current timestamp and then returns all features which have a creation date within 3 minutes of this very moment. Again, this is a great workflow depending on your requirements, but today it doesn't leverage the caching, which is critical for viral loads. The alternative to this current timestamp construct is to introduce the concept of time to your data workflows. One efficient way to approach this is with scheduled notebooks, which can calculate a feature's status relative to time on a regular predetermined cadence. This can populate a status field indicating whether or not the feature is current relative to your business requirements. And now, instead of filtering by current timestamp, you filter on status. Stay tuned for more information on this workflow in our ArcGIS blogs, and be sure to check out our notebook sessions. Thank you so much for attending this presentation. Jeremy, Paul, and I appreciate your time and look forward to learning more about your interests and requirements for authoring viral maps and apps. Here are some additional resources on the web which cover many of the topics we discussed today. And now, let's do some Q&A. Thanks again. Talk to you soon.